So, helicopters. Helicopters typically will have one main rotor and one tail rotor. Tail rotor usually being fairly small. The main rotor is in charge of providing lift, and the tail rotor controls pitch controls yaw, not pitch. So main rotor lift, tail rotor yaw. The way that it does that's a cool shape. Sorry, distraction. The way that it does that is utilizing pressure. A lot of people, when they think of helicopters, they think of a big fan with these tilted blades, and they think, air comes in over here. Let's get a nicer color for air. Air comes in over here, and it comes in and it bounces off and it goes down. That air going down is what provides lift. And not really. So I'm just going to take a second to describe what lift actually is. So air typically likes to be even. It likes to be spread out nice and evenly across its space. All things tend to be spread equally across their space. To provide lift, or what causes lift, is when some object moves through, and all that nicely moving air right here suddenly is being compacted. It's all being shoved together, and it creates this high pressure area right here. And even more than that, right behind that object that is shoving all this air together, there's this area of lack of air, low pressure area. And between this high pressure area and this low pressure area, there is a lot of force, because this this high pressure stuff wants to be where there is low pressure. It wants to get up to this space, so it's shoving back against whatever is pushing it. That is essentially what provides lift. In aircraft, we see this as a wing, usually with a fairly level top. Fairly level top. I hate paint sometimes. Fairly level top. I hate my life. We're just going to use a brush, because I can't deal with this. Much better. Okay. A fairly level top and a much wider bottom. And this is over dramatized because I'm lazy. But it's the same principle. Air is being all nice and gentle over here, and suddenly there's this force comes in, shoves all this air, makes this super high pressure as it tries to move around this wing. And all this area up top, relatively, is low pressure. And that's the key, is being relatively low pressure. It doesn't have to necessarily be lower than the air around it, just lower than this, because this air wants to be up here now, and it'll push, and that's what gives lift. So helicopters utilize the same principle, but instead of having a wing that's shaped a particular way, blades are mostly flat or slightly concave. And what this means is that instead of just being one fixed thing like a wing is, it's a fixed plane, a helicopter blade has to be moved. And it can be moved to any number of positions that all give different amounts of lift. They all have different pressures underneath of them, and they all do different things. If I could get my damn colors to actually behave. There we go. So they all provide different levels of pressure differences, and therefore they all provide different levels of force. The way that helicopter blades do that is with something called a collective, I believe. It essentially is just a thing that rotates, located on the base of the wing, or of the blade, and it rotates the blade up or down so that it changes the angle that that blade is sitting at. And that change, like I said earlier, changes the pressure that the air is being pushed into and being voided out of, and therefore it changes how much lift is there without changing the RPM of the blade, the speed of the blades themselves. What happens though is one of the main laws of physics is that if you have a force moving, there is an equal and opposite force. So we have this blades rotating this way, but to get them to rotate, we have a little motor, and that motor is not only pushing the blades around, but it's pushing the helicopter around the other direction. Obviously a lot slower than the blades because it's a lot more mass, but it's still pushing. So to counter that, to negate that so that the helicopter isn't just spinning out of control, we have the tail rotor. The tail rotor is usually a lot smaller because it only has to deal with the rotational force as opposed to lifting an entire aircraft, and its job is to control the yaw of the aircraft. It keeps it from going around in circles on its own, but it works the same way. It's instead of being rotated on a level-ish plane and forcing the air into it and out, or am I trying to say? Instead of pushing horizontally to create vertical lift, the blades are positioned. That's weird. Blades are positioned more vertically, and they're rotating vertically to create the pressure to the right and left of the aircraft on the sides, so that it changes the direction of the force to be left and right, or left and slightly less left, or things like that. So that's how lift and the yaw are controlled. To control pitch is slightly different. All the blades in a helicopter converge on a single point. So yeah, they converge on a single point. This point is typically where the motor is housed. Sorry, where the motor touches the rotors. Usually there's a drive shaft that goes down, but this area is separate from the thing. This area itself is connected to the main body of the aircraft. And these joints are more like pistons. They contract and expand to tilt the entirety of the blades themselves up and down. Not the angle of the blade, but the actual blades themselves up and down to change how the positioning of the helicopter. So say your center of mass should be, in a perfect world, directly below your main lift right here. By tilting the blades, we move the direction of the lift from being directly through the center of mass. Tilting, say, this side down and this side up, we move this direction that lift points differently. And this moves this tilts our helicopter. Yeah. So that's where you get tilting. Forward and back, left to right. This is what causes that stuff. If your center of mass isn't in the center, tends to cause issues, because now your main lift is no longer centered. So say your center of lift goes through here, your craft, it's like the whole of it, is now going to move this way, because you're lifting from this side of your mass. So now your entire craft, with that center of mass being farther back, is going to tilt backwards. So it's important to get it center or close to center of your center of lift, so that line goes straight through it and all's happy. Because if it's over here and you're lifting, your craft is going to pitch down if it's over here and you're lifting, your craft is going to pitch up. And if it's to one side or the other, it'll affect your strafing. But if you're making a symmetrical aircraft, then your center is, of course, in the center. That's the whole point of being symmetrical. Some helicopters counter that by... I'm just going to steal this. There we go. Some helicopters counter it by having multiple rotors so that your center of mass can be anywhere between these, and all you have to do is adjust how much lift you generate for each one to center it. These are called tandem rotor helicopters, and generally for a tandem rotor helicopter, they rotate opposite. So whereas this one may rotate counterclockwise, this one would rotate clockwise, so that the force imparted on this, so this one would want to rotate the craft straight, or rotating right. This one over here would try and push it rotating left, and these two forces being equal makes it so that we have perfect harmony on the craft. It has no want to yaw. We can mess with that one. Tandem rotor helicopters do evade me a little bit. I have no idea how they control yaw. I'm sure it's something really simple. I just haven't taken the time to go look up how it does. But I've heard some people say it's a lot simpler. I've heard some people say it's a lot harder. I don't know. The only type of helicopter that I've ever attempted has been one with a rotor and a tail rotor. So as long as you got your rotor and your tail rotor, you can make just about any helicopter design, keeping in mind your center of lift relative to your center of mass, as always with Kerbal. But yeah, make a little helicopter, and it's all up to you.